78 cents to a man's dollar, 85 cents to a man's euro, 90 pence to a man's pound. These are numbers that for many women are all too familiar. How much women earn compared to men.
Women still don't get paid as much as men. Experts say there's not any sign that's going to get better anytime soon. The gender pay gap is real. It is still here.
What do we want? Equal pay! When do we want it? Now!
This is not a women's rights issue. This is a human rights issue. Women are mothers. We raise the children of the future. We're raising the next generation. And if we can't earn enough to support our families, then the whole community suffers.
Today, the gender pay gap is pretty well known and well talked about. But beyond the blunt comparison of wages that typically make headlines, the more important but lesser known gap is the gender wealth gap. On average, excluding property, British women have less than half of the savings and investments that men have. That all adds up to a £1.65 trillion wealth gap, something my guest today knows all too well.
It's odd when we think about it that so many of the top jobs, whether it's business, politics, are held by just one narrow group of people with very few exceptions.
We shouldn't have to ask for a pay rise to be given a pay rise. We should be given a pay rise because we've earned that.
Today's guest is Baroness Helena Morrissey. She's one of the founders of Money Matters, a female-led investing initiative by AJ Bell. Helena's worked in the financial services industry for 3 decades and founded the 30% Club to get more women on company boards, and is now the chair of the Diversity Project. On this episode, we discuss the findings of the recent Money Matters report, uncover key points in a woman's life where their finances become derailed, and how to overcome these financial hurdles. Let's dive in. Helena, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the Finimize Podcast. Now, let's set the scene. Can you bring the Finimize audience up to speed on the Money Matters campaign and the reason why AJ Bell launched it in 2021?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on. So the Money Matters idea first came up actually when I first met Andy Bell several years ago now, and I'd spent quite some time in my career trying to do a few things around the edges. I mean, nothing really that hit the nail on the head, as it were, around trying to help more women with their finances. And Andy and I got talking. This was before I became chair of AJ Bell, and I noted, they only had a third roughly of their customers were women, and that's sort of in line with the industry average. So Andy immediately responded positively and said, yeah, it would be great if we could do something to help educate women, inform women. This is not necessarily a sales pitch. This is just about trying to make sure that women have all the tools at their disposal to really feel in control of their financial destiny. So back in 2021, we launched a piece of work, some research, just looking at the investment gap between men and women, because there's a lot of talk about gender pay gap, but we wanted to find out more about the investment gap.
Wonderful. And Money Matters has done some research previously, which you mentioned. So, and it spotlights the massive gender wealth gap in the UK, which I think sits at 1.65 trillion. Well, incredible. But this year you had a new focus for your research report. Do you mind just explaining the reason behind the name and the purpose of the report?
So we've controversially called it Financially Wobbly Bits because to be honest, it became a bit of a pet name, affectionate name for it, as we discovered as we were going through the data, just how many wobbles there are in a woman's life. Really what happened was we wanted to get behind that 1.65 trillion pound wealth gap between men and women in this country. And if I put that in terms of what it means for each of us individually, then it means that women have on average less than half the amount saved and invested as men do, less than £50,000 compared with over £110,000 for men. And that included everything except property. So it was staggering to us that it was so large, and we wanted to find out the multiple reasons. We knew it wasn't going to be a silver bullet, but the number of financial wobbles in a woman's life, right from when we are studying and have more anxiety about paying off our student debt, even though we tend to borrow less money than men do. Obviously having children, many of us, that's a big financial impact. There are multiple, impacts throughout our lives, including difficulty when women go through the menopause when it comes to their finances and careers. So we ended up calling it Financial Wobbly Bits. Some people say they didn't like that, but if it gets people reading the report, taking action, then I'm happy about that. Sometimes having a boring name means that no one pays any attention to these very important reports.
As I say, any press is good press. So I think it's definitely
maybe not
people's
always.
attention.
I've slightly changed my mind on that one, but I do think this is a topic which a lot of firms actually are doing quite a lot of effort and research into the reasons, and trying to understand better and trying to help women better. But so far, it's been very limited progress. So I do think having something. Thank you, Finimize, for putting the attention on it. But we need more attention. We need more women talking about their money. We need more people discussing what's going wrong. So yes, if it adds to that, so be it, and I welcome that.
Wonderful. And so let's now discuss some key findings. The latest gender pay gap figure came in at 9.4%. So first of all, I think you've already touched on it, but I'd love it if you could talk us through what actually happens during a woman's life that ultimately makes them less wealthy than men.
Well, clearly, the gap in our earnings, which is sort of summarised by that gender pay gap figure, plays a big part. But as we've already highlighted, we've got a much bigger than 9.4% gap in terms of women's wealth. So what happens really is it's a cumulative effect. I mentioned student debt. Then when women start work, we tend to, over 90% of us, accept the pay we're given. 60% of us never ask for a pay rise in our entire careers. And those that do, only a third are successful. And those numbers are quite different from the ones for men. We don't have enough money to put in our pensions, perhaps because we get less earnings. That's a big factor. But also women tend to be less interested, it seems, in pensions. We tend to prefer cash rather than investments in the stock market, which means our money doesn't grow. And then I mentioned, having children, which obviously not every woman does, but it certainly has a very big impact on women's financial well-being, with even today, and irrespective of the fact that women might be earning quite a lot less than their male partner, women are 3 times more likely to take responsibility for arranging and paying for childcare than their partners. So we've got a number of factors just there that cumulatively add up to a lot. And then when we get to the later life, if we manage to work our way through all of that, we found that nearly 1 in 10 women either stop work completely during the menopause or cut back their hours, which I think is shocking, actually, because, as I say, we've made it through all those hurdles to that point. So you can imagine that, and then divorce, often women don't negotiate for or think about their partner's pension if they go through a divorce. So we basically make a series of, not missteps necessarily, but just not making the most of the financial possibilities. And that all adds up to this giant gap between our financial health, and we often live longer in retirement age as well. So obviously it's like a double whammy. We've got less money and we need it to last over a longer time.
There's so many factors playing into this massive gap. And I think we're going to kind of dive into most of those different sectors. But let's start with the pensions gap. So your research shows men have almost £49,000 compared to £32,000 for women. In your opinion, what is the biggest factor driving this gap? And what is one thing women can start doing from today to really improve this?
So what we found was a large proportion of women, I think it was a third, actually have no idea how much is in their pensions, which, it's a very ostrich-like behaviour, really. And again, going back to this problem that often we're not that interested in these issues, even though clearly we will be interested in, do we have enough money to live on? Now, let's remember, we've got less money usually in terms of our earnings. But what we found was that a half of women only contribute the minimum amount into their pensions. So we're earning less, contributing the minimum, or at least half of us are, and not really aware of what the amount is. So first of all, you can do a sort of checklist. You can go into and find out how much do you have saved in your pension, where is it invested? That's important as well. Obviously, where the correct place is going to depend on your age, and whether you've got enough money perhaps to make additional contributions. Even £50 paid in every month can add up to, we worked out £42,000 extra after 30 years. So obviously it depends a bit on what age you are when you're starting to get on top of all of this. I've got to confess that I found pensions a bit like, and I work in this whole area. I've been a little bit, all these bits of paper that come through every day. I've got pensions with different employers, with defined contribution schemes. It seemed complicated. But during lockdown was my opportunity to kind of steel myself to go through the paperwork and to work out where it was invested, consolidated, what I needed to live on later on. And actually it felt incredibly empowering and very sort of relieving, really. I felt very much less worried after I'd done all of that. So if you're in that place, set aside an hour every week, Sunday afternoon, or when you normally do kind of boring chores, and you might get into it as well. I found actually it was fascinating the more I learned. So there's that wall of, inertia sometimes when we think, oh no, it's just overwhelming. It needn't be. Just make that first step.
I think that's really helpful. I'm writing this all down in my checklist. You also touched on how a third of women said they had no idea how much was actually in their pension pot, which is really interesting because at Finimize, we recently ran our quarterly modern investor pulse report. And we found that over 75% of all women do not lack confidence when it comes to managing their own investments. So why do you think we're just seeing a really big less engagement from women when it comes to pensions? Is it something to do with the industry as well?
I think it might be. I mean, I think we could discuss whether we've got, the whole population we were looking at, and perhaps people who are subscribers to Finimize are already showing that they're interested in investments and so forth. So perhaps there's a little bit of that going on. But I do think, and this is a global phenomenon, it's not just the UK. I've participated in a number of pieces of work and efforts by women to look at the global picture. And generally speaking, I think there is an anxiety among many women, not perhaps that we lack competence ourselves, but just that we might be ripped off, that we might be sold to, that often we'd be dealing with a male financial advisor or somebody who we feel may not, understand our broader needs. And all the evidence suggests that we are motivated somewhat differently in terms of what we're looking for when it comes to our investments, that we're more motivated or more likely to be motivated by an actual life goal, like paying our mortgage off or helping our children with their education or paying for one of their weddings and so forth. Whereas, and I know this sounds too stereotypical to be true, but men are quite motivated by just the notion of making money. So the whole pitch to women around retirement, around looking after your own financial well-being needs to be quite differently addressed, needs to be in the language that will appeal to us. And I say I've experienced that myself. This statement used to drop through the letterbox each year, and now it comes online, and you kind of like got to wade through that to work out what it all says. And I think we need to work harder as an industry to make sure that we connect with women, and that perhaps even the language that we use, and it's not to be patronizing to women, it's not because we don't understand, it's just that certain language turns us off. Language that's about militant sort of overtones or dominant, you can win on this, that sometimes just doesn't appeal to us. So I think it's really great that we've got more women involved in trying to help other women with their money.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely something the industry will miss out if they don't change their language, change their approach. So I think that's a really important point. I'd like to touch on the point about a woman's first financial bubble, well, potentially one of. Your research shows women are less demanding in the workplace, and also 3 in 5 women have never asked for a pay rise. Do you think it's just as simple as we need to ask for a pay rise, or is anything else in play here?
Well, in an ideal world, of course, it wouldn't be he, and it usually is he who shouts loudest who gets the pay rise. Companies should be structured in such a way that they recognize who's working hard, who's performing, and reward that with a promotion or a pay rise. But I'm afraid, in my experience, that's often wishful thinking. And I actually think, for now at least, we need to just get better at asking. And I suggest to women, it can be a very excruciating, nerve-wracking conversation to have. but you just kind of got to steel yourself. Sometimes find a moment. Obviously, only ask when you know that your company can afford a pay rise. Sometimes people have pay freezes. Make sure you keep a record of why you feel you deserve a pay rise. You know, as I say, emotions can take over. Have a little cheat sheet. This is your performance. This is the responsibilities you've taken on. And perhaps you may also discover that somebody in your team, possibly a man, is paid more than you. So be very, matter of fact about it. Bring in the evidence. And I think, we'd be surprised, actually. I've certainly had some experience of overcoming my embarrassment and asking for a pay rise myself, that often, the answer has been yes, because people have perhaps made rather snap judgments. They've kind of looked at the budget and, allocated it rather quickly. Whereas if you go in and you make it clear that actually you deserve more, then often the answer will be yes. So I would love to see more women just feeling more comfortable about asking. That 60% figure about never asking as well. I mean, you could just do it once, and, you could get it. But say go in prepared.
No, I think those are really good points. I'd also like to talk about couples and cohabiting. And maybe less of a surprise was the point you had in your research about how couples split their finances in the home. A third of men say they pay more for bills than their partner. In many cases, I assume it is because men do earn more. But what are the main implications of this setup for women's future finances?
Well, I think often we end up feeling that we're the lesser party. We're less valuable. It's a psychological barrier then to, whether we follow that through into the workplace and ask for that pay rise. And obviously, if you're not married, then it can leave us vulnerable. We do spend a bit of time in the report talking about the single tax, and particularly women who've left a long-term relationship suddenly find that they're really struggling financially. We also share a case study and talk about the optimism of youth and the different approach that younger couples are taking now, where they seem to be having more conversations about money, splitting bills more evenly, at least discussing, how they're going to make the finances work. And I guess, again, I'm the sole breadwinner in our family, but it's always been really important that we talked about the money, that my salary was really our money, and we kind of weren't fighting or arguing over where the priorities financially were. So whatever you do, whatever you take away, whatever your own personal situations, because you might not be able to pay 50-50 on the utility bills, for example, talk about it. And then as your careers perhaps change, if one of you gets a promotion and the other doesn't, then make sure this is a live, dynamic situation, so you don't always feel that you're the kind of junior partner in the relationship, at least when it comes to money.
And I think it was interesting about the point of the long-term impacts of potentially, buying a home. Do you think it would be just a good tip to say, maybe wait that extra 12 months so you can save up an extra 5% for a deposit or something like that? So you will have, 50-50 or more of equity in, your big purchase like a house. So in the long term, you get those rewards back.
Well, I'm not going to try to tell people how to exactly live their lives when they are, and it's a very personal thing. If you had this desire to buy a home and you found the exact right one, and between you can afford it, then obviously I don't want to be responsible for saying to someone, "Oh, wait to miss it." But ideally, you would be more equal partners in it, or at least arrange things such that you can contribute as time goes on. Obviously, if you take out a mortgage, sometimes it's possible to overpay a piece. So if you take out a loan and you haven't got quite even equity, then you make an undertaking that if you did get that pay rise or that bonus or something that would enable you to contribute more, then you can address that. But ultimately, as I say, I think it's just more important to have that conversation and know where you stand, know where your rights are. I mentioned divorce. No one goes into a marriage intending to get divorced, but if you do, then you should obviously make sure that you are conscious of your rights. And I hope that people would look at our report and think, actually, I must remember to ask about the pension if we get, because I think I've forgotten the number now. Sorry, but I think it was an amazing, like over 70% of people getting divorced did not include the pension of their partner in the calculations of how to split the monies.
Yeah, that's a very big thing to miss out on. And now moving on to children. Children do have this massive impact on a woman's life, and both professionally and financially. From your research, though, I can see a fifth of people are not even planning to have children because of financial implications. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think people are doing the numbers and thinking, actually, we can't afford it. It does make me very sad. I mean, I'm a sort of apocryphal mother in terms of I have 9 children, which is probably seems like nobody will, everyone will struggle to relate to that perhaps. But, we talk about some of the challenges involved, but it's also a very, joyful thing for many of us to have a family. And it makes me very sad that people are assuming that they just won't be able to afford it. In my own case, I mean, my husband and I are very naive when we had our first child, when I look back on it, and we hadn't done the maths. We hadn't, I'm not a good proponent for what I'm advocating here. But we knew we had to make it work. When we looked into the cost of childcare, we realized we couldn't afford anything really at that moment. But that made me in particular, because I knew my job had more earnings potential, very determined to get a pay rise. And when I was passed over for promotion after returning from maternity leave, I thought, that's it, I have to leave. I have to get a higher paying job. We literally won't be able to live because our mortgage costs and our nursery fees at that point were swallowed up both of our incomes each month before we bought any food. So it was a needs must. And actually, with hindsight, that was incredibly motivating. And I do feel in lots of ways it was kind of making of my career. Now, that might seem a very masochistic approach to take. And it may be, I appreciate that not everyone's in that position where they can look forward to potentially earning more money. But it does make me very, I suppose I want to pass on the idea that where there's a will, there's a way. And obviously most of us have, one child at a time. People are these days turning to grandparents to help with childcare if that's a possibility. Or different opportunities are arising as the government is sort of finally, helping with childcare vouchers and so forth. So I would just urge anybody who really wants to have children to kind of work backwards from how much money do you need to have to do that, rather than just discount it and say, I can never do that, because to me that seems a very sad outcome. And I'm very conscious that lots of women don't want children, and that's fine too, but don't get forced into that position. And we only have a sort of relatively narrow window as well. It's not something you can come back to like in much later life anyway. So I'm full of hope about that one. And it does make me sad to see those numbers. I do get worried about women being penalised for having children. And I would love to see more policy, but also employers approaching this, recognising that couples have children. It's not just a women's business. It's the couples. And certainly I've seen a big impact on where companies have introduced equal paid parental leave, and it's really shaken up things and leveled the playing field really a lot between men and women.
Yeah, I think those are all important points. And I think speaking of conversations and having more conversations around money, having more conversations with your partner, so I think in that it's very close to my heart, because for the last 5 years, I've been growing and supporting our community at Finimize of female investors. We run a ladies investing club bi-monthly. We do meetups and also run other bigger events in London and around the world. And one thing we've actually found from hosting these intimate conversations for women, it really is this proven way to build financial confidence. What are your views about the importance of conversation and community for women?
Well, I think it's absolutely vital, and congratulations, Michelle, and everybody at Finimize for all that you're doing here, because clearly it's working. And, you cited the figures of 75% of your community feeling confident about their ability to invest. So what I've discovered, and this is obviously no surprise to anybody, and it wasn't in our research, but most of us, certainly young women, rarely talk about money. People might mention it if they short of money and can't go, out one night. But that's about the extent of it. People in this country, in the UK, don't ask each other how much do you earn. That's seen as a pretty crass thing to ask. Whereas I started my career in America, in New York, and everyone immediately says, "What do you make? Where do you shop so you don't have to pay retail prices? And what have you got in your 401k? Their equivalent of our pension plan." So, talking about money is the first step to feeling very comfortable with it and to feeling, as we've used the word a couple of times already, empowered and in control of our own destiny. And I love the idea of, investment clubs and just, socializing the whole concept of being interested in money and finding it fulfilling and obviously rewarding, literally, as you get better at investing your money.
Selfishly, it's also changed my life, being able to, host these events and have conversations. So I definitely agree. Talking about...
women are good at it once we get started as well. Sorry, we're good at it once we get started. It's just breaking the ice often.
Definitely. I think, almost being given the permission to talk about it. And, we won't stop talking about it. I have to sometimes chuck them out of the door. And also, I think opening up about an experience that you've talked about in the past, and in your book I've read, A Good Time to Be a Girl, you've shared when you returned to work after having your first child, you were passed over for promotion. How do you think more women can leverage experiences just like these to shape their professional and financial growth?
Well, that experience that I had was, that baby that I'd had now has a baby of his own, and is starting work today as a professor at Oxford University. So it's kind of a long time ago, but sadly, my experience is not consigned to the history books. Obviously, there are campaign groups like Pregnant and Exclude that are, documenting when women still suffer pregnancy discrimination or, things that happened to me. So I just want everyone to know that, the fact that it happens to you don't take it personally. I mean, you can either quit and get upset, or to be honest, we'll probably feel a lot of emotions about it. But I would urge people in that position to, get angry, but then get even, kind of decide you're going to really address that. And for me, because necessity is a mother of invention, I knew I had to get another job. I could fester in the corner feeling grumpy about it, or I could just say, okay, I hear you, because actually when I was passed over, I asked about my performance, what did I need to improve? And that was when I was told explicitly, in a way that wouldn't happen today, that it was because there was some doubt over my commitment with the baby. So it was very clear in my case to do with the baby. And there are companies, the key is to find a company where culturally your value as a whole person, I know it sounds a bit airy-fairy to say that, but is genuinely welcomed. And I found a company, even in the somewhat traditional investment industry, as it was at the time, certainly, which actually valued difference and said, the founder, Stuart Newton, had created a whole investment process based on the idea that no one has a monopoly on great thinking. So it was not just sort of add-on, it wasn't some sort of special initiative. He genuinely believed it, and it drove our business. So find somewhere like that. It's not a unique place, but you do have to do your homework and make sure that culturally you will be, welcomed and valued for what you bring to the table, including possibly what you've learned as a person since becoming a mother. That's something that sometimes I'm told I should make more of, but I'm very conscious that some women don't want to have children or can't have children, and I think we've all got something different to offer. But you become a person, through life, and can contribute a lot based on your lived experiences, not just your professional ones. So yes, I want to urge anybody who's suffered from that, genuinely, there is a place for you where you will be welcomed, and please don't give up and think everywhere is just the same. I was passed over for that first promotion. In the second company, I became CEO within 7 years. So I am a failure, then a success, and it's the same person. And you can do the same.
Wonderful tips. And I really enjoyed reading about your experience as well in your book. So definitely check that out if anyone's interested.
The plug, Michelle?
Yeah, little plug. The next thing I want to discuss, something a little bit more shocking? I mean, it's all wobbly bits, financially wobbly bits are shocking. But you mentioned previously 1 in 10 women who go through the menopause stop working as a result, which we can clearly see the impact on people's careers, but also their finances when this happens. What are the main implications of this? And is there any strategies you think women can adopt to navigate these challenges successfully?
Well, I think this is really key to why so many women, I've just been looking into it, 30% of us over 50, or between the ages of 50 and 64, don't work in this country, which to me seems such a waste of talent, but also, as I said, with many of us living longer, then it's very hard to imagine that we can have enough to live on comfortably for all that time if we retire so early. And the findings were actually more disturbing in some ways, because another 20% of women said that their confidence were really affected, another 12% said that their performance suffered at work, and others said that they had taken holidays or sick days or unpaid leave to get through a difficult time physically for them. I would love to see more employers really think about how they can support women going through the menopause, because it is a wobble that doesn't last forever. And of course, we have a lot of experience to offer. And it seems such a shame if we made it through all those other hurdles and we're still working and we're still productive and we're still hopefully enjoying ourselves at work, that we then suffer yet another blow. So I've worked with companies. I chair something called the Diversity Project, which is a collaboration across 110 investment firms. And some of them have really tried hard to offer menopause counselling to the women going through that in their workplaces, but also training for managers. There was one terrible story where it fortunately didn't end in tragedy, but a colleague of mine was so traumatised by what she was going through, undiagnosed menopause symptoms, that she became suicidal. And when her manager found out, it was a man who was completely supportive, wanted to know how he could have helped, how he could have spotted the signs, what could they put in place, and they're now campaigning with others to encourage private medical insurers to include menopause treatment as standard, but also put in place all these training. There's a lot of talk in the media from celebrity tell-all stories about their menopause, but it needs to kind of be followed through into the workplace, because, as I say, women will come through the other side. And, happily, that colleague of mine, she's got a promotion since and really turned the corner and is doing amazing work to help other women going through the menopause in the industry. So it's a good news story in the end, but could so easily have been a terrible tragedy.
No, that it is a very, important story to share. And I think also the fact that potentially, the institutions should be doing more. Is there anything else, that you think institutions should be doing for women? Because everyone will be going through menopause, whether they like it or not.
Yes, exactly. No, that's the thing. We've mentioned, not every woman has children, but every woman will go through the menopause. And at the same time, so I think at the moment we just haven't had the left hand and the right hand sort of join up, because so many employers say that they would love to retain and still develop the talent of their senior women. And yet at the same time, they kind of we're all pretending that menopause doesn't affect anybody. And there are something like 34 different symptoms we can go through, physical, mental, psychological, and as I say, it's temporary. So I think we just need to talk about it, going back to our theme of the day, really, that we've moved on from the embarrassment, certainly in the media. Now we need to kind of have it as part of, they have childcare policies, we have menopause policies, and just recognise that this is going to be perhaps a year of someone's life where they will be, potentially out of sorts. They may sail through it, but some women's symptoms are very acute. And to offer treatment, offer counselling, offer help to managers. I've heard so many women who say they've been put on a performance management process. Their dip in performance is recognised, but it's not attributed correctly to the menopause. So having those better conversations, and sometimes maybe a woman has to talk to the other woman about it rather than have the sort of squirming conversation with a man. Interestingly, I have heard in those companies that have embraced menopause policies and have been talking about it, that actually a lot of the men say, oh, now I get what my wife's going through. And actually everyone thinks it's a good thing, that men, we might feel uncomfortable with the discussion, but actually they've tended to embrace it as well.
No, I think that's really important. Conversation, again, it's very key. And moving on, so given we're talking about the wealth gap, you are someone who actively advocates for diversity in finance. So very lucky to speak to you on this topic. Can you share your insights on the progress that has been made in recent years and where the industry stands today?
So we've made some progress in terms of women in senior management roles. There's some more CEOs who are women in the industry. There are more people, running things, but on boards. But we haven't seen any progress, for example, in the numbers of female fund managers, which is still stuck at 12%. The number of female financial advisors, I gather, is around 14%. So there are these really critical gaps in the progress. I'm now trying to tackle in a very focused way the female fund manager part, because again, I think that goes back to often why women don't trust the financial industry, because they just don't see themselves, on the other side, and they worry that the person might be, not relatable to them. And we, in the Diversity Project, have launched something this year called the Pathway Programme as a targeted intervention. It's a 12-month programme designed to create more female fund managers. It complements the professional exams, the CFA qualifications, and on-the-job training. And very importantly, every woman on the programme has to have a sponsor back at her firm. So this is not a question of, I'll put the women on a programme and job done, but actually got to be championed back at their firm. This year, 60 women from 33 firms went on the programme, and next year we're just closing the application process, but it looks like we'll have 80 participants, 80, and I think it's 44 firms. There are less than 200 female fund managers in the UK as things stand. So finally, after 35 years of working in the industry, I finally feel we're onto something, that actually we've got the scale, the focus. 3 women have already been promoted this year, which is exciting. But obviously lots, the proof will lie in the pudding. And it may have to go for a few years till we see the results really come through. But I now think we can't have sort of vague, wishful thinking kind of interventions, send women on a confidence building course or something like that. It has to be very targeted. And at the same time, just to mention, of course, very conscious that we've had a lot of sexual harassment scandals this year, including in the financial industry. And, there's no way women are going to be encouraged to join us and to stay and develop their careers if they're worried about, will they be, attacked? So we also have a new initiative called Safe Space, which, as it sounds, is a completely confidential opportunity for women, or anybody actually who's suffered, could be someone who suffered racism. And 18 people have come forward, 18 since we launched this at the end of May, to tell their story in confidence. And obviously we're not going to we're trying to help them if we can, but also, work with firms to improve the industry, because this has got to stop, obviously.
I mean, it sounds like there has been some incredible progress with the work that you're doing and supporting others doing. So, yeah, thank you for that.
It's not finished yet, I'm afraid, but I'm going to, I'm a determined person who's, we've seen as well people coming through to us who are obviously very fearful of telling their story. And so the next thing we're going to do is actually do a survey, which again, I'd love anyone listening to complete. Why, are people worried about coming forward? And if so, can we kind of identify specifically the reasons? Might be because they don't trust, what will happen. It might be because, they've seen problems escalated and not taken seriously. We want to kind of know because obviously then we can address those issues. So I am determined. At the moment, it's not enough. I can't really say that I'm completely confident we know how to address this, but we will get there.
No, that's great. Thank you. And research indicates that women tend to approach investment decisions very differently to men. Has the role of education changed over your career, and how can the financial industry create better content that makes investing more approachable and accessible for women?
Well, I would love, I have 6 daughters, 2 are still at school, and I would love to see financial education featured more heavily at schools. In schools, it has been introduced, but often I think teachers don't have great training themselves or the resources themselves to give it. I know that some specialist organizations have then tried to harness investment, for example, investment firms coming in and giving the talks. And I would love to see a program develop that really, the challenge is obviously the scale that's required. It's quite daunting looking at all the schools. But obviously online allows us to reach more people. And again, I don't want to keep advertising it, but Diversity Project runs something called the Skills Workshop, which is for people who are usually students who might want help filling out CVs, how to prepare for interview, that kind of part of it, not investment skills. And we've had, I think, 9,000 students go through that and to benefit from that because it's online. So I do see that we could use technology to do more here. And I've got quite a lot on my plate, but I'll be very happy to help with that. But at the moment, I do ask my 14-year-old who now does a lot of life skills at school. That's good that schools prioritize that. But I say, have you learned about budgeting yet? Have you learned about managing debt? Have you learned about compound interest? And the answer so far is no. So I would love to see, because most children go to school, it's starting there and then being enhanced by the investment industry.
You do have a lot on your plate, so hopefully someone else can pick that up. But
please, could somebody else come in with that? There are institutions that organizations, both charities and campaigns that have been set up that are working hard on this. But it's just the scale of the operation is pretty intensive. And I've learned through things like gender equality campaigns, it takes a lot of people doing a lot of things in the same space to really shift things.
And do you think, focusing on the financial services industry, do you think there is something in the way they communicate to women today? Do you think there should be more importance on bite-sized, more digestible content for women?
Yeah, I think some organizations are doing this now. What we've learned obviously is that people love watching videos, love podcasts, and there's no need to, I think a very short time ago, pre-pandemic, people would tend to send out lengthy, reports, and people don't absorb that. They don't necessarily, their attention spans are shorter. So I think there's things happening. I don't want to mention all the competitors of HBL, but most are doing something around women. And again, I applaud that. I welcome that. I think that's, if we got and I've just started doing a column in the Telegraph Money section that's relaunched, focused on women's finance. It's great that so many things are happening all at the same time. Obviously your work at Finimize is in the sweet spot here. So I think just having more emphasis on this and making it relatable, making it interesting. Going back to our opening comments, a lot of this looks boring from the outside. Pensions does not sound very thrilling but it's important. So having things that are they're not dumbed down. It's just more that it's speaking language that is appealing and attractive and makes us think, that's me, I should do something about that, is very important part of this.
Great, thank you. So we're at almost at the end of the podcast, and I've asked you a lot of questions, but I have a few more to go. But these ones will be a little bit different. So we'll be playing a lightning round. Are you ready for the first question, Helena?
I am as ready as I'm going to be anyway. I have no idea what you're going to ask me.
So the first question is, what was your first investment?
My first investment was a flat property in London, in Battersea. Yep, and it worked out in the end, but I had to buy it with at a loss already, because my husband had bought a flat with a friend and it went into negative equity, and they didn't have a proper arrangement. So I had to buy. We were getting married, and I had to buy his friend out at the price they'd paid for it. So started negative, but it came good in the end.
maybe this might be the answer, but what was your worst investment?
Well, actually, to date, my current property. Because, we have a house in Notting Hill. And when we bought it, everyone said, "Oh, the area is coming up." The part of Notting Hill where we're at is people think of it as a very sophisticated area, but our little part was not. We're still waiting on that, and I think things will change. But really, when we tried to sell it recently because we thought of changing our lifestyle a bit. We obviously timed that very badly with the property collapse, really. So we're biding our time. But so far, that must be, it shows it can work in either direction. It's perhaps less reliable than investing in stocks and bonds.
You're in it for the long
in it for the long term, whether we like it or not.
And so which investor do you admire the most?
Oh, that's a difficult one. That's got to be rapid fire. I'm going to come up with the cliched Warren Buffett because actually he once wrote me a letter, which was very unexpected, about women's initiative, which means I obviously have a soft spot for him because it was quite an amazing thing to receive a letter from him. But it's taking such a long-term perspective. Obviously, he doesn't win on every investment, but I think we lack long-termism, generally in this world. People are in it for a short, to get rich quick sort of thing. And he's obviously taken completely the opposite approach. And I think we need more Warren Buffetts to invest for the longer term.
Agreed. Our community absolutely love anything we write about Warren Buffett. So
they all soak it up. Yeah. Well, obviously there are things that he missed because of his approach, but again, it shows that it can work. You've got to have. I think what's key as well is you've got to have a style that you stick to. That it's the worst is when people duck and dive and try something new every month. The opposite of a Warren Buffett approach.
Great. And final question, almost final question, second last question. What is the best piece of advice, investment advice, you can give to our listeners that you wish someone had told you when you were younger?
So it's a very basic thing. Two things really. Get started early as you can and never try to time the market. Just do it gradually. And I think we have to fight our psychological sort of makeup as human beings. Often people get very scared and stop investing just at the time when they should be putting more in. Just do it every month, a little bit aside, and it's the best approach. Absolutely convinced about that.
Some people just need to be reminded of the basics.
Yeah, it's not, it's kind of less exciting than if you're trying to kind of dip in, dip out perhaps, but so many people just get, they buy high and they sell low if they don't do this very disciplined approach. And then if you have extra money, sure, you could use that to try to, put in a little bit when markets fall, put some extra in, but just get that base going steady as she goes. And it all adds up over time.
It does. And finally, where can people find more about the wonderful work you do at Money Matters?
So we have a new website. There you go, just in time for the podcast. AJ Bell Money Matters is the name of the website. And on there we have our own podcasts. We have articles about, and sometimes they're about things like the latest interest rate rise. Sometimes they're about, menopause in your money. And a lot of information there. It isn't a sales pitch. It is to educate, to inform, to allow you kind of, explore, questions that might be on your mind. So please do check it out.
Great. Yep. Please check the website out, everyone. And that is all for today. So the final thing to say to you, Helena, is thank you very much for joining me on the Finimize podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Michelle.